Welcome back to Close Mode, the enterprise sales show. Today, I'm really fortunate to be speaking with Allysa Plekavic, who is the global sales enablement lead for Checkpoint Technologies. Hello, Allysa.
Hi, Brian. It's lovely to be here. It's good to see you.
I am really glad to be here talking to you today about, what I consider not only a street level topic, but something that's very near and dear to my heart. And it's sales training, and more importantly, the adoption or lack thereof of sales training. So let me start with a kind of a quick overview that it's reported that American companies spend 26 billion a year on sales training, right? And as part of a larger project, recently we interviewed like 60 different people at 40 different companies. And part of the interview was talking about sales training and then implementation and adoption of that sales training. And they all kind of told the same story that we announce it at sales kickoff, and then we roll out, you're nodding, right? And then we roll out the events around the world. And then most of them, not all, but most of them were really disappointed in what happened after the trainers left. So my first question to you is, what do you see as the root causes of that? Companies kind of repeat this cycle over and over again. And why is that?
Oh, there's a million reasons. And I'm no, complete expert, but I've been on the sales side. I've done the trainings, and then now I've been on the side where I conduct the trainings and roll out programs. And, there's elements of the business trying to do easy fixes for big changes that they want to make,
Yeah.
where they think, they can throw things at the sales organization and it's going to turn the ship around. One of the things I see very consistently, it's been very interesting when I work with sales leaders, is, on the leadership level, on the top rungs of the sales leadership level, they'll come to a decision on kind of a macro business level of what needs to happen. They'll decide on a tool, a process, a method, you name it. And there's this chasm between that leader, those couple of tiers of leadership, and then where execution happens. And that's like
Yeah.
the first line manager and then the reps or the SEs or the, whatever role we're talking about. And a lot of leaders really struggle with like, how come I trickled this down and there's a major drop off? And I'm going to steal the analogy that my friend Jim Dickey uses, which is the first line manager is the fulcrum to any lever. So they're not the lever, they're the fulcrum. They're that little piece where without it, you're just talking about a stick.
Yeah.
And so the managers have to be able to execute, have the skills to do that, and the time to coach and do those things. The other thing is they're a dumping ground for everything.
We found this too in these interviews that, like, you're right, that it is these frontline sales managers are expected to do the pull through, and they don't have time. We heard this over and over again with practitioners, VPs of sales, CROs, and sales enablement leads. That the manager's supposed to do it. They don't have time. What we've heard very often too, and we've all heard this over and over again, is the best salespeople get promoted to managers, which doesn't always give them the chops or the skills they have to do the coaching. Yeah,
and then they're under invested in too. That's like rarely do the first line managers get the resources and the coaching, the skills. I mean, usually it's the individual contributors or it's leadership. So that's another component.
Yep. And as you say, they're buried, they're slammed, and it's mostly reporting, for sure. So the other thing we've seen too, I'm wondering about your experience with this, is we've responded in my current business and my past company to a lot of RFPs, and there's so much. We like to say there's actually 90% of the focus on something like this is the events, the rollouts. Who is the consultant that's going to deliver them? Overview your methodology for me. And I've responded to 8 or 9 page RFPs where 80 or 90% of it has to do with the event and the methodology. And then the question is always asked, well, what happens after you guys leave? And the point is, okay, we can do it for you. Quite frankly, that's expensive and it's difficult to scale. We can do the reinforcement, or your frontline managers can do it. And that's kind of the fallback, but it doesn't. Neither one of those things happen. Like, we might come in and coach a few deals. Managers might coach a few key deals as well. But yeah, I think that's really a great point. Is that's the part that makes it come alive, and they're not brought into it up front, which I heard you say. and then they don't have the time and or the skills to get it done. Let me ask you this. In my opinion, and you can argue with me on this, I don't think sales training methodology, especially the rollouts of it, has changed in about 25 years. It's like, here's the methodology. Again, we're going to announce it. We're going to roll it out. And if you were to redesign like a modern approach to training, what do you think is the key that's missing today? You like this?
Ooh. If I had infinite resources, you mean, an
Yeah.
infinite budget? Yeah.
Yeah.
Training in and of itself, and I've been through great training. My Cisco days, that they really invested in us as individual contributors, and I was able to apply a lot of the skills I learned. But in general, I liken training soft skills to university, whereas there's this concept of applied to more of like a trade school. So
Yes.
imagine, you go take an economics course. Edward Jones isn't going to hire you as a financial planner right out of just because you took that course. But if you
Yeah.
go to trade school and you decide you want to be a plumber, you're going to get the not just the skills but the applied education to roll out and be a plumber on day one.
Yeah.
And so I liken sales soft skills. Not that they're not useful. It's just that it's only about 50% of the equation. Now, I was able to take the skills I learned and eventually be really successful with them. But if you only cover the first 50%, the soft skills part of it, without putting into context your unique value proposition to the market, to your customers, aligning it with their business challenges, defining those proof points, if you don't do that for the sellers, they're going to have to do themselves. And there's two results from that. One, they can be successful, but it's likely going to take them longer and more failed attempts.
Yeah.
So missed opportunities. And secondly, you're going to get inconsistency. And businesses love inconsistency, right? So you're going to get some sellers that are better at it than others, and you're not going to be able to shift or make those large scale changes you want to do with your sales organization, because some people get it, some people won't. So I consider it, enablement's role within an organization. And honestly, I think that's why sales enablement has been invested in so heavily, especially over the last 10 years, is there needs to be a function within the organization that can take the soft skills and then translate what, marketing and PM and everybody is taking, messaging out to the market, translate that to the sellers to make the context. So the sellers can say, okay, I learned how to do discovery, right? I learned the skills of having a discovery conversation with my customer. But what are those actual unique metrics and
Yes.
data points and things I'm going to pull in about my solution compared to my competitor, and everything that I can then, take the conversation forward, as opposed to just sitting there and asking them a bunch of blank questions because I know how to do discovery. So,
It, yeah,
yeah,
you hit on something that I think is right on. You talked about sort of skill acquisition versus skill application, and the one thing that I would disagree with you on is that you were saying it's sales enablement's job to put that in context. And I can think about like the challenger selling, right? So several years ago, that went out to everybody, and fundamentally, I completely agree. I think the research that led up to it was good. I think the idea was good, but they sold this empty box and you had to plug in your insight here. And this is the part where I disagree, is I actually think it's on the consultants who are bringing this in to bring you in work that's in context. It's not how do you sell value, it's how do you sell checkpoints value versus this competing alternative, in this geography. And that's, you mentioned trade schools, and I was in a startup incubator about a year ago, and there was a gentleman there who had this concept of white collar trade schools, and which I thought was brilliant.
I
Lawyers,
like
accountants. Yeah. I mean,
that.
basically challenging, throughout this incubator, what I was saying to him is you understand you're challenging the entire US, like college
Like higher
level,
education.
higher education.
Okay. Right.
And
Good luck.
right. But he was right on. Like if you get a lawyer that comes out of white collar trade school and they can practice law, she can just boom be on your team working, or an accountant, but it's no, when they come out of schools. And so that's what you made me think of, is that's the metaphor that like wasn't clear in my head, is that's been the metaphor for 25 years of kind of sales training, is we have our methodology. And quite frankly, I was in that business in the past. and it's much higher margins to roll out your methodology over and over again with some light customization than to put it in context. But you're right. If the lid came off and we could design what we want, we'd be learning to do things in context, very situational skill practice with the language and the value props of your business. Yeah, I think that's really cool. So yeah, I mean, I started with all these companies we talked to. I have to say, I really can't think of one who was really pleased. And it's 40 different companies who was really pleased with like the going from skill acquisition to skill application consistently. But where you've seen it work or know of others who have made it work, what do you think drives where it does work?
Yeah, a lot of times I think companies and enablement too, we think of it as this big conceptual thing that has to execute on all cylinders to be effective. And a
Yeah,
lot of times I find the most effective things are very practical,
yeah,
very day to day. And so I have a really good example in my mind of I know a couple of sellers at a company and they rolled out a certain methodology and it was for handling the sales process of an opportunity. And part of it is you have to align you have to investigate and find the customer's business needs, and then you need to align your business value
yeah,
to those needs. And you need quantifiable data points to do that. And usually sellers waste hours and hours scouring their intranets and their, white papers and whatever to find those data points.
yeah,
But this company, as they rolled out that methodology, they in Salesforce tied a customer reference sheet. So if a seller was in the process of defining those proof points around their solution, they could reference this giant spreadsheet on every customer win and all the details around why the product solved for those problems at these multiple other customers environments. And so I
yeah,
just thought that was such a practical way to, again, add the context, add the applied to the concept of, I need to do this alignment. Here's all the data you need it right there at your fingertips. And that's
yeah,
one of the biggest things sellers struggle with. It's what I struggled with when I was a
yeah,
seller was the data exists, but where is it and how do I use it when I need it
yeah.
for the purpose? So
Yeah, and it's there are great new tools coming out that will do sort of content management stuff for you and give you the right piece at the right moment. But I was just having a discussion earlier today with an AI expert, and we were talking about what I generally call crowdsourcing, like a level below that. So you're
yeah.
working on a deal, and you're able to be. So it's one thing to get the proper documents at the right time, which thankfully, like that's getting better. The next part is, hey, Allysa, seven other of your peers have been working on this deal, and these were the specific value props that
Yes.
they leveraged, right? And these are this was the situation, and I feel like there's so much that comes from management that if finding an effective way to crowdsource would really make this stuff work. And I think salespeople would lean into it. It's like
Oh yeah.
here's what the best one of my consultants say: it's scaling best practice to common practice, right? Which is again not documents. It's your peers, 400 of your peers around the world saying, look, selling this thing against this competitor by region.
Yeah.
Here's where and how we're winning.
That makes me kind of think of like, you think about how we use Chat GPT to basically pull all those data points for you. So I
Yeah,
need to write a good email to an executive, and I want you to rewrite it for me based on all these data points that you have access to from the internet.
yeah,
It's kind of the same concept. It's like I need to be able to pull all best practices, all data points, so I can really drive home these points and to have that data at your fingertips. I mean, as a ex seller, I would love it. I would use it all day.
well, it's interesting though. It's back to your answer that I loved to the second question about contextual. I mean, to me, this is the ultimate contextual. If you're being
Oh
trained
yeah,
on how to leverage the insight and the best practices sort of at the deal level, at the transaction level, in a living, breathing environment. And you're right. This is take the lid off it. What would modern sales training look like? I think it's fun. It's having me kind of reimagine how we think about doing this. Yeah, that's pretty cool. We, as I mentioned at the top of the show, this is of particular frustration to me because I sold a lot of methodology in a past life that I feel like didn't get implemented. And we executed a research project with Selling Power and Standard Register Corporation. We studied 150 companies and talked to them about sales training implementation and adoption. And a small number of them said we did it. And the definition is we deeply ingrained it into the DNA of our organization. And so we pulled out those companies and we did further research and focus groups with them. And it's interesting. In one of the focus groups, one of my clients, Mike McCarver with KLA 10 Core, I traveled around the world with this guy and I saw these worksheets of another selling methodology on people's desks all over the world. And in the focus group, I said, Mike, how the heck did you pull that off? And he told me a story, by the way, that they completely matched the research. He said, well, the reason we decided to roll out this selling methodology is because we were a national company that grew to global and we were still selling locally and our customers had global buying plans against us and we are getting clocked. And we needed a consistent methodology to have team plans around the world for selling globally. And he said that was the initiative. It wasn't sales training for sales training's perspective. It was focusing on this specific, initiative that the CEO was struggling with. And he said that got the attention of senior management. He said literally the presidents of EMEA and Asia Pac, they were in these training classes. So because it was tied to a very strategic business initiative, we got the attention of the executives, which got the attention of the frontline managers. And he said, that's why when you and I travel around the world, you're seeing these forms filled out on everyone's desk. And those were the three drivers from the research. Tied to a larger initiative, we get senior management buy-in because it's not training, it's strategy execution. And you've talked about that before, about making that connection.
It's a really good point. It doesn't matter what level you're at, especially in the sales organization, they all just want to sell more. They want to hit their targets and go beyond. And so if you can align whatever the business needs to something that's going to allow leadership down to the individual contributor to sell more, you're going to get that timeshare. Like we talked about the managers, how they just have no time to coach. They're so busy. They will make that time. I've seen them make that time if they see that training or that tool or that information is going to help them and their sellers execute and sell more, all the way up to, like you said, the executive sitting through trainings because they can tell it's going to pay off.
Yeah, you and I in another conversation talked about that, which I think is like a painful and salient point, that maybe one of the reasons the managers aren't doing it is because it doesn't help, right? And
we do lots of things that doesn't help our sellers and our managers.
Yeah, so we can blame it on all kinds of things, but if the fundamental methodology isn't helping win deals or optimize deals or something along those lines, that forget it. I have too many other plates spinning to focus on this right now.
Again, it brings it back to context. Is this going to actually help me in this deal be more successful? If it is, great. If not, I got a million other things to do.
The other thing I want to run by you as it relates to kind of reimagining what sales training would actually look like, and I want to go back to this notion that 90% of the focus is on the event and who is the human that's running the event, and then even the evaluations are tied to, did you like the human that ran the event? Was it he or she entertaining? And then there's that maybe 10%, which is, what happens after the fact? I would argue that there's got to be a complete flip-flop, that we need to redefine training as that application. How do we, over the next year, put 90% of our resources on the deal by deal application? And what we found, we've been playing with a little of this, it lightens the lift on the training piece. I've told some folks that, we've rolled out 2-day workshops all over the world for a huge tech company based in Seattle. And I needed 2 days with these people. My consultants needed 2 days because we're never going to see them again. So we had to pound everything into their head. When you have a super strong, scalable plan for pull through, the skill acquisition piece gets lightened up. If I'm going to coach you on 50 or 100 deals over the next year, we don't have to drill down for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say there isn't value to training and those sit down sessions where you're forced to sit in a room for 3 days and really hunker down. I learn well that way, instructor led. So I still think there's definite value to it.
Yes.
But any consultant that you talk to will say, what is it, like a 90% drop off rate after 48 hours of whatever you've learned. Yeah. So it's definitely not it's just the kicker. It's just the start off point. And then, like you said, then there's all the operationalizing that needs to happen on a day-to-day basis to actually make it stick. for sure.
Yeah, I keep going back to your context thing because it really struck me that there's a lot of methodology companies that you get their form at the end. You get the green sheet and you have to fill in the
Yeah.
green sheet. And my argument has always been it's the answers that go into the green sheet. Every rep is zero basing answers. And by the
Yeah.
way, if you could collect 200 of those green sheets, you could
You
then
get
have the
200
best.
different answers.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
and it's just it
And
seems
consistency.
yeah.
Yep.
It seems so wasteful to me now that you make that point that everybody is zero basing and filling out that form over and over again. And, as we reimagine sales training, I mean, technology is there now. And we've discussed a little bit about AI, but technology is there now to do that, to completely rethink the training. And how do we collect the best practice answers? And then how do we share and have people rehearse and situationally skill practice
Hmm.
the actual language against actual value and actual competitors. Yeah, it's cool. It's
And
really
that's no small feat. And most organizations and most sales enablement teams within organizations need massive help there, because
yes,
that's not an easy thing to pull off
yeah.
within a company.
Well, and maybe that's why it hasn't changed much in 25 years because the technology software was added to methodology training, but only in terms of automating the blank worksheet that people had to fill out. And I heard this quote recently that software ate the world and now AI is eating software. And so maybe now the other thing that comes to mind is as we reimagine what sales training could be like, it's really technology is the enabler to rethink it, and maybe that's one of the reasons why it's been stuck in the same place for so long because it's very difficult to scale it used to be very difficult to scale what you and I were talking about.
It's kind of the evolution of the consultant versus the tool and the tech and the AI and the information. Is like, how much are you going to continue to rely on that outside consultant, or can you find the tools and the data points and things to help you go execute internally? So
Yeah,
I think there's a mix there for sure. It's not either or by any means. And I'm not saying, again, training is very valuable. It's very hard to gather inside an organization. Again, back to if I had a million resources and budget, I'm sure I could go slam it, but I don't. So most teams don't.
I want to jump up to something a little bit higher level, and again, it's super helpful for me to think about, some of the root causes are managers don't have time. The stuff isn't contextually done. There's way too much emphasis put on the event and not enough and emphasis and budget on the pull through. And how do we scale that? How do we tie it to business priorities? Yeah, I think a lot of those are missing today. So to kind of put an end cap on that, how would you, this is an out of the blue question, but how would you define sales enablement? We looked recently at 10 different sort of industry analysts and nonprofit associations in terms of that definition. But I want to talk to you about how you define it today and where you think it's going.
From my own personal experience, I define sales enablement, we're the translator to
Okay.
both sides. When it comes to corporate messaging and what we're putting out to the market, right? Marketing is one to many. They're saying, we're fantastic, buy us, we're fantastic. The sellers are then required to flip that on its head and go to one-on-one with a customer and say, what are your needs? We can help you. And we can do
Yes.
it better than our competitors. And most companies really struggle with that flip of a switch. And I believe sales enablement is a critical component to
Yeah.
reversing that messaging. It relates to processes, tools, everything that the company wants to enable the sales force around. Enablement's critical in translating why those things are useful, how they will be useful in the sales process, in the buyer journey, all those kind of things. When talking about context, sales enablement is critical to adding context to anything that the company is going to do to support the sellers in executing.
I read an article recently that talked about the difference between marketing content and sales content. And marketing content, like you said, is one to many. And American Marketing Association put out a stat a couple of years ago, really damning stat, that 90% of what's coming from marketing to sales is not being used. I mean, that's so
No.
off the charts crazy. But I think it's because of what you just said. You just helped me realize that it's that difference between the broad market messaging and down to I have to talk to this human, this specific buying influence about these two or three aspects of my value. And it's
Yep.
usually not granular enough, right? Is that fair?
Oh yeah, it's big messaging, big concepts, whereas a seller is talking real world situations and real world needs. And we talk about like the buyer journey and the buyer
Yeah.
cycle. But me being on the buyer side now, it's very interesting. I was a seller. Now I'm the one that's evaluating solutions and vendors and those sorts of things. And I realize that we do not prepare our sellers in any way to understand what it's like as a buyer
Yeah.
to get a project through, to get it prioritized, to find budget for it, to get it moved to the top of the stack so that we can go execute. And we're asking our sellers to guide the buyers to do this. And the sellers have very little visibility into actually how any of that works on the
Yes.
inside.
Yes.
And so there's very few methodologies that really help with that, in
Yeah.
my personal opinion.
Yeah.
And what we could do more is give the sellers a peek into really what it is it's like to be on the buyer side.
Yeah, it's interesting that part of our practice, we've actually, I'm sorry to say, consulted with professional buyers and have written books on, how professional buyers do deals. And at the highest level, what I'll tell you is being a lifelong salesperson, sales manager, and sales consultant, um, I knew nothing, until I went in and started consulting to that side. And there's so much more that happens. And we
Oh,
refer to this as speaking the language of procurement. If you don't
yep.
really know what someone in a buying role is going through, you're going to have the conversation they want to have, which is usually about price. I can get the same thing cheaper from somebody
Right.
else. If you
Absolutely.
don't really understand how they function, so I think that's also really good insight. But back to the sales enablement definition, I had mentioned that we looked at 10 different sources, and you kind of covered these. There was three things we found in common across all 10. One is content, two is technology, and three is training. And it's
Yep.
kind of pulling all three of those together. But I like how you talk about kind of being the go between a bunch of those. And so so I've been hearing a lot lately, and I think the Sales Enablement Society might be changing their name to the Revenue Enablement Society. What
Mhm.
what's your thoughts about the future of sales enablement? Where is it going?
I think it's only going to become more critical, especially to those companies that need to move fast and want to stay ahead of the game. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of revenue enablement, sales enablement. What I'm seeing shift is this concept of lots of global programs that are not tailored to individual needs. So lots of global e-learnings and skills workshops and stuff that assumes everyone's on the same level and everybody has the same needs, to what I believe revenue enablement is, which is a lot more aligned with more localized sales organizations. And within my team, we have some of both the components, right? We do global trainings on products and skills and stuff, but we also have people aligned with the leadership in each of our main sales geographies that are aligning with that VP's go to market strategy for the year and offering like localized programs and efforts. So I'm seeing the melding of like the localized and the global. And I believe that the localized is actually getting more traction, and there will be more focused on what are the practical things that we can do to support you and your leadership all the way down to your management's
Yeah.
execution on sales motions and those sorts of real like we talked about business strategy type things, as opposed to big trainings. And we still need to do product trainings and all that kind of stuff,
Yes.
but the localized stuff is landing a lot more, I see.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I think a lot of training, and now your company headquartered in Israel, correct?
Hmm.
So I would think your company probably has a little more global approach, but a lot of companies are headquartered in the US and they buy it in the US and then they push it out to the world, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of part of the problem, is it's being sold to Americans with American needs, and then being
Oh,
out
and
it
then you
goes.
cookie cutter that out to right, and it's
Yeah.
not specialized. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yep. Yeah, this is cool. You gave me some stuff to think about the future, and where it needs to go. And I hope for people listening, it's like, again, those the keys that we found from our research and you found is context based stuff. Tie it to a business problem, and that's probably going to engage the senior leadership. That's also going to engage the frontline managers. But yeah, the number one thing that comes out for me is kind of context and best practice sharing, and moving away from what I generally call blank form methodology. So yeah, this has been really fun, and hopefully we'll have you back at another time to dive into maybe the buyer discussion. I think that would be fun.
I love it, Brian. Thanks for having me. I had
Cool.
a great time.
Thanks, Allysa.